Welcome everybody who made it to the webinar in the Ambassify webinar series, Sustainability for Companies. And I am Jorn Craeghs, and I will be giving a webinar today around sustainable behavior design. So sustainable behavior design revolves around this frustration, which you see on the slide, and which is actually the prime reason I get up in the morning, professionally at least. And that is the statement that there are so many ideas for sustainability out there, yet so little action. It is frustrating to know that in a way we could solve most of the big sustainability challenges in the world with the ideas that are already out there, yet they are not embraced enough. They are not bought enough, used enough, accepted enough. And it's also not that there is completely no excitement or popularity around sustainability at the moment. It is increasing, and people are concerned, and people have the intention to act sustainably, but there is the intention-action gap. Taking real action still happens way too little. So what do I mean with actions? Actions actually means that we have to do something. And in that way, it becomes the necessary link between having ideas, whether it's innovations, products, services, whatever, or even people already having the idea that they want to do something in their head, and actual impact, making an actual change in the world. To make an actual change in the world and to make actual impact, we have to start making different choices and really show behavior. Just a couple of examples from different spheres of the world, let's say. Let's say one societal problem is skin cancer. It's a problem for which we actually have invented at least a preventative solution using solar cream. And it's not like our supermarkets are lacking solar cream on the shelves, but if we do not succeed at actually stimulating the behavior of applying solar cream before you get out the door, we're not making an actual impact. And this is still happening way too little. So the ideas are there, the innovations are there, but the actual behavior and the action is there way too little. Another problem, heat loss on a very personal level if you have a badly isolated home. So the solution is, of course, there. There are numerous isolation solutions. But if we don't manage to stimulate the actual behavior, or gedrag in Dutch, is like installing draft strips, then we are not making an actual impact again. And people are convinced about isolation, but way too little people actually get to the point of buying and installing those draft strips. Say you have a bad company culture, then there are solutions like focusing on transparency and honesty, but way too often those are abstract concepts for people. So we again need to focus on what is the actual behavior so we want people to do. And that might be giving constructive feedback after a meeting to, in that sense, create a new habit of transparency and honesty, or a new ritual in a company. But if we don't manage to stimulate those actual behaviors, then we are just spreading ideas, maybe enthusiasm, but not impact in the world. So that's why I founded NoNo, a sustainable behavior change agency, to focus on actual behavior change so we can create actual impact in the world. And in order to do that, I rely on insights from behavioral sciences to actually figure out why people are not showing sustainable behavior and how we can actually stimulate that sustainable behavior. So why is there actually so little action? In order to answer that question for you, I have to delve into some of the basics of behavioral change and behavioral sciences. And that all revolves around our brain, the sciences that figure out how we actually make decisions on the conscious and subconscious level. Behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, sociology, anthropology. And the godfather of behavioral sciences, or at least behavioral psychology, is Daniel Kahneman, a psychologist who won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2002 and who managed to summarize the work of him and his companion Amos Tversky in the book Thinking Fast and Slow. And the main theory of this revolves around the fact that we have system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. Our system 1 thinking is what he refers to as our fast thinking. It's automatic, it's always on. It's also what we refer to as our intuition or instinct, and it actually uses very little energy. If you were to refer to our brains as a battery, then using that system 1 uses really little energy. But it's also subconscious. We are not really aware that this is happening. It's happening with all of our instincts, but on a subconscious level. On the other hand, we have system 2 thinking. That's what he refers to as our slow thinking. It's on demand. We actually have to activate that thinking. That is what we call our rational thinking, but it takes a lot of energy to use our system 2 thinking. And that is what we consciously perceive in what is happening. This is very clarifying and useful for us to use in analyzing human decision-making. But the most groundbreaking results of his research and other behavioral scientists' research is that our system 1 thinking takes up much more of our mental bandwidth. Much more of our thinking and decision-making actually happens on that system 1 subconscious level. And it stimulates and dominates often our decision-making and our behavior. What does that actually mean, for example, for sustainability? It means that we act to threats like this one. If we were to run into a bear like this one, for example, on a holiday vacation in the Alps or the Dolomites in Italy, then when seeing a bear like this, our subconscious thinking would think, this is happening right here. It's also happening now, in the here and now, not in the future or in the past. This is a very personal thing because I am here on this mountain path and this bear is there. It's a big bear, has sharp teeth, so it's a certain danger, and this is an enemy. In this situation, I can clearly see we are enemies. And those are the subconscious checks of our risk checklists that actually activate immediate behavior. And that would be freeze, flee, or fight mode in this case. This bear, however, is in stark contrast with this bear. This bear, the polar bear, is the most used image around sustainability in the world, and we use it to try to motivate people into action around sustainability. On a rational level, we could be convinced by this. The problem is our subconscious thinking is dominant, and our subconscious thinking thinks this bear is far away. If the ice there will melt, it will be someday. This bear is someone else or something else. It's uncertain if this particular ice block is going to melt. And who did it? Who is the enemy here? In reality, it's all of us. We are all partly perpetrators here for the melting of the ice, but our subconscious thinking really can't process that. It's almost impossible for us to accept that, not on a rational level, but on a subconscious level. This knowledge from behavioral sciences leads to the fact that humans are irrational. It sounds bad, but it isn't. It is actually a scientifically neutral definition to say that we don't think rational all of the time. And even most of the time, our thinking is influenced by our irrational subconscious thinking. It's not bad, it's just what it is. The good news for us, if we want to analyze behavior change and actually change behavior, is that we are more and more predictably irrational. If we delve into the sciences and the behavioral sciences, there are more and more learnings about how we make our decisions, and that can also help us to actually change the way we make our decisions. Now, what does this predictable irrationality mean on a behavioral level? It means that actually 3 elements have to be in place for behavior to actually happen. And this is where another scientist, Brian Jeffrey Falk, the founder and director of the Stanford Behavior Design Lab, comes in. He has spent the last 25 years analyzing human behavior, and he came up with a formula, which you see in the screen, B equals MAP. And he says that no behavior will ever happen if these three elements aren't in play at the exact same time. So B stands for behavior happens when three elements are present. And this model shows three elements which have to be present at the exact same time. On the vertical axis, you see that the M stands for motivation. And human motivation can either be high or it can be low. And it is driven by our intrinsic motivation first and foremost, but we can also extrinsically motivate people extra. That has to be in place. Second element which has to be present for behavior to occur is ability. Behavior can be hard to do or it can be easy to do. And behavior needs to be easy enough for people to do it. And that is not just on a physical level, but also on a mental level. We need to be able to process stuff, to remember stuff, to comprehend stuff. Even if people are highly motivated and behavior is easy to do, behavior will not yet happen if the third element is not in place, and that is a prompt, which a synonym for it is also a trigger. People need to receive a signal intrinsically, subconsciously, or consciously to do something. And only with habits does a trigger happen subconsciously, intrinsically, but for all other behavior, we have to be triggered extrinsically before we can actually start doing things. Only when these three things come together will behavior happen. And this is fundamental when we think about engagement, engaging the workforce. Because when we are only able to spike enthusiasm with people, then we're only spreading ideas. But we will only create impact when we can actually make people make different decisions, act differently. And so we have to take this formula into account and the fact that humans are irrational thinkers in order to think, how can we, on a rational and irrational level, make sure that there's enough motivation, enough ability, and that we have prompted people at the right moment and the right time. What I will now share with you are three barriers which are holding people back for actually making sustainable choices and acting sustainability. And each barrier will be on different levels of the formula. So the first barrier will be on an ability level, second one on a motivational level, and the third one on a trigger or prompt level. The good news for today is that I will also be sharing boosters. So I will be sharing tactics on how to overcome these barriers for our subconscious thinking. Starting off with ability, because we very often think in motivational terms, but we think way too little actually about the fact that sometimes people are to some degree intrinsically motivated, but that maybe the behavior should just be easier for them. Because at the moment, it is hard for people still often to act sustainably. And in that sense, sustainable behavior often feels to people like making a big leap, a big jump. For example, there are actually a lot of things we should probably stop doing if we want to save the world and save life itself and our lives as well in the long run. So one of those things is that it would be a very good thing if we would all stop eating meat. However, on a perception level, if we spread this message, that is often for a lot of people unimaginable. They can maybe think about the fact of limiting it a bit, but stop eating it feels like such a big leap that it feels like completely unimaginable. On the other hand, we often try to spread simple actions that people can take. You see them in the newspaper often as well. And you see, for example, you see the 6 simple tips shared by De Morgen, which is a newspaper around heating and being more energy efficient, like working on the holes where the air comes in, or even stop smoking and move more, or get under a blanket, or hang up good thick curtains, or use the remaining heat in your kitchen. And despite the fact that these actions are all rather small, they still feel quite overwhelming. Even those small air holes, actually acting up on those in our busy lives where we have busy jobs, other stuff to do, feels like big tasks. And sustainable choices, when they are out there, they are often still less available, less visible, or less accessible. If we just look at the big fast food chains in the world, you could already say that they are making big leaps as to plant-based options, for example, but still, it's still a search in their menus for where you have to find it. So only the dedicated few who are actually vegan or veggie eating will find them naturally, but other people will find them somewhere in between in the quick menu or at the bottom of the list with the McDonald's menu. So in reality, taking sustainable actions is often a big leap, but especially to our perception, it's often a big leap. So how do we make it easier for people? How do we boost ability? By actually installing small steps for people. If we want people to eventually stop eating meat, the message less meat works best. There has been research going about which shows that actually using the less meat option as opposed to eliminate your meat has a longer lasting, has a bigger effect and a longer lasting effect in actually limiting the meat consumption of people. It's maybe counterintuitive for people who want to, of course, advocate for anti-meat in the beginning, but even if that is your strategy, then using less meat now is a smarter strategy. That just has to do with what we call the latitude of acceptance for some people. What is imaginable for them? How far can I go? And then they can imagine less meat now earlier, and maybe if they start eating less meat, then something else becomes imaginable, maybe eliminating meat in the long run. Although that we often share small steps like close those small air holes in your house, still that feels like a big thing. So that is why we should make it even smaller, and that is where the tactic of chunking comes in. We can break up actions and behaviors into their smaller steps so that it becomes even more manageable mentally. For example, when I say place some draft strips into your home, you could say that's fairly easy, but for a lot of people, it's still a big task to do. So we could break it up into 7 steps, going from count your window to plan your shopping visit, clean your window surface, and in the end, enjoy the warmth. And breaking it up by this and trying to take people along the journey and just stimulating the next small step has a higher chance of actually getting people to do it all than just throwing the big action at them. But also, if we want to make sustainable behaviors and if we want to shift it from big leaps into small steps, we should think about how can we turn it into default behaviors. A lot of people are very excited about mobility and sustainable mobility in cities like Copenhagen, and they wonder why they have succeeded in making so many people bike to work. The reason is quite obvious if you visit, and if you, for example, visit Parliament building, because this picture that you see at the moment is the bike parking at Copenhagen Parliament. They have decided that taking the bike should be the default option. It should be the logical physical option, meaning that it is closest to the entrance and closest to the exit. So in that sense, you have turned it into the normal option to take, and you've made it harder actually to then take the car. So this is thinking about physical defaults. How can you make the behavior actually that easy that it becomes the most obvious option? And turning something into the most obvious option can also happen on a mental level. Often the sustainable options are still the alternative options, and the normal option is the unsustainable option. Burger King, another fast food joint, actually thought about this. And in Vienna, in Austria, they have turned their plant-based options into the normal options. So if you go in there and you order your Whopper burger in a Burger King in Vienna, you receive a plant-based burger. If you want the meat option, you have to ask for the meat option. And this is a very interesting way about actually normalizing the sustainable options and turning those into the default options, while actually making the unsustainable options the alternative, not normal option. So that was the first barrier and booster on ability level. So it's hard now to make sustainable options because it's a big leap. And we can actually make it easier to do by turning it into small steps, either physically or mentally. Then we delve into the motivational part. And a subconscious barrier we experience at the moment for taking sustainable actions is that there are negative social norms out there. What do I mean with that? I mean that when people rationally understand at the moment that some behavior is probably unsustainable, they often look around them and they see that a lot of people are still acting normal while doing unsustainable behavior. We all happily get in the car together and are stuck in our traffic jams. We are all on a mass scale still eating meat. We're all flying to far off destinations, way more than we maybe should, and so forth. So because of that, our rational thinking might understand it is not okay, but our subconscious thinking looks around and says, look at all the people who are doing it. It must be normal. Our subconscious thinking always thinks that what happens on a big scale is probably normal because it's acceptable behavior. That's what we call a social norm, but in this sense, it's a negative social norm. And so we see that unsustainable behavior happening all the time, and we normalize it because of that. But we, the people who stimulate sustainable behavior, sometimes even add to that, because we often launch campaigns where we put a spotlight on the undesirable behavior and we put numbers behind it by saying, this is how much it is happening. We do it with good intentions. We try to put a spotlight on the bad behavior and say it's happening a lot because we want to make the problem big. We want to create urgency and we want to tell people, look at how much this is happening. That is a message that does come across on a rational level, but on a subconscious level, people actually look at that and think, if it's happening so much, it's probably still acceptable. You see it as well with this campaign here. It was launched some years ago and it says, one cigarette butt. You hear 40 million times a year. And so they again wanted to make the problem of throwing away cigarette butts on the streets because they end up in the ocean a huge problem. But because of this, behavioral sciences has shown that actually the chances are huge that you actually stimulate this behavior because you normalize it. So actually, that we see so much unsustainable behavior out there and that we often stress still how much this is happening is actually a stimulator for our subconscious thinking to make it still acceptable and keep on doing it. Social norms, however, can also be turned around and used for the better. So what we should do is not put a spotlight on the negative behavior, or at least on how much it is happening, but we should put a spotlight on the positive behavior. And we should focus on positive social norms, which can then be a motivation booster. It helps to think about the fact that the future acting sustainably is already here. It is just not very evenly distributed, as William Gibson once said. It is not because it is not the dominant behavior yet that the sustainable behavior is not happening yet. We just have to think about how can we put a spotlight on it and how can we start evenly distributing this, not just on a physical level, but also on a mental level. And you see that positive social norms, when they do pop up somewhere, they are contagious. They talk about the solar panel effect nowadays, and whether somebody has a solar panel or not, well, actually the most important factor to indicate or predict that is whether or not there are other solar panels in that person's neighborhood. So when you see solar panels popping up in a neighborhood, then it is very, very likely that that neighborhood will become dominantly solar infused. So that is just natural social norming at work. You see it popping up, and because of that, it all of a sudden starts growing. But we, of course, when we want to engage people and stimulate more sustainable behavior, we also need to think about how can we put a spotlight on the behaviors which are maybe not so visible, like solar panels popping up on houses. One of the older and most known experiments from stimulating ecological behavior was increasing towel reusage in a hotel. It was efficient for the hotel chain to actually use less water, but also, of course, good for the world because of using less water and less laundry detergent. And in the Phoenix area, they did an experiment then where they used 3 different messages on one of those small signs to actually stimulate hotel guests to reuse their towels. The first one was the practical message, help save the environment. The second one was partner with us to help save the environment. And the third message was join your fellow guests in helping to save the environment. And the result was that the third message, compared to the first 2, was 34% more effective in stimulating towel reusage. Why? Because we are social animals. It is not that we rationally read those signs and think like, okay, if other people do it, I should do it too. But our subconscious thinking scans these messages and very quickly feels like there's a social norm at play. It feels like you're expected to act like this in this context because other people do it too. And because of that, you are subconsciously stimulated to also reuse your towel. And that talks to your rational thinking. And because of that, more people in this case actually reuse their towel. You also see that social norming or social comparison works to make people act more energy efficient. Another known experiment was of O-Power, a sustainable energy provider, and they wanted people to act more energy efficient. And they actually shared people's energy uses as compared to their neighbors on their energy bill. So when people received an energy bill, they saw how they performed as opposed to their neighbors. And nobody wanted to be the sucker in the street. So if you were less performing than your neighbors, people were motivated to actually start being more energy efficient. However, there was one perverse effect with this intervention. Is if people received the message that they actually outperformed their neighbors, then they started slacking a bit because they were already king of the hill, so to say, or king of the street. So for that, they optimized the experiment. They just sent the comparison to your neighbors to the people who were on the low performing end, but the people who were on the high performing end, they just sent positive feedback. You're doing great, keep on doing it. And then they had completely optimized the messaging for the different people there. You can't only think about testimonials or putting a spotlight on numbers of people who are doing it. There are creative ways to actually put a spotlight on new social norms. In China, for example, they are giving electrical vehicles a different colored license plate. Why? To make them stand out in traffic. That way, they don't really become more present, but they do become more present to your perception. They stand out, and because of that, you notice them more often. And because of that, your subconscious thinking starts thinking that there are more electrical vehicles out there. So that's a smart way to actually make them stand out in perception and also add to that positive social norming. Wording is also very, very important. If you want to describe a norm for how many people are actually starting, for example, to eat plant-based, you could do it in 2 ways. And they have tried to experiment with that in stimulating plant-based choices with Americans. And they described it first as just 30% of Americans reduce their meat consumption. And in that sense, 17% of the people started choosing the meat-free or plant-based option. However, if they shared the same factual number of 30%, but said 30% of Americans have now started to reduce their meat consumption, then the uptake of plant-based options doubled to 34%. Why? because that gives you the feeling of a growing trend. Why the first messaging actually still gives you the feeling that it's a minority group and might always stay like that. But in reality, it is an emerging thing. So then using the language that also accentuates that and pointing to the rising trend actually gives people the message, I should hop on this train too. So also those positive social norms make sure to stress the rising trends so that it actually, despite the fact that it's maybe not the dominant behavior yet, people at least understand that it's the popular behavior to do. We have now talked about the ability level and about the motivational level. Ability level, it is still big leaps for people, so we should turn it into smaller steps, both physically and mentally. And on the motivational level, people are blocked at the moment by the fact that there are negative social norms out there, and we often stress that still. While if we put the spotlight on positive social norms, then we might actually motivate people to start showing sustainable behavior. Last but not least, we need to trigger people. We need to tell people to start acting and show up on the right places and the right occasions. But there is a barrier still as to the triggers that we are using. And to talk about that, I would first like to explain an experiment that happened once to you. And this experiment was the in-group, out-group experiment. What they did is they invited some people to come in and to watch videos. A video of a hand, which you see in the screen, and that hand would be punctured in the video by a syringe, by a needle. And the goal was to actually measure with brainwaves of people how much compassionate pain people would feel. So if you would look at this video of somebody getting punctured by a needle, how much pain do you feel just out of compassion and empathy? They would measure that with different videos, different people getting punctured, but there was only one variable. The variable was the wristbands that people were wearing. So which color wristband are they wearing? And those different colors of wristbands, and that the participants also were informed about, signified which religion the people who were getting punctured have. Are they atheists? Are they Hindu? Are they Scientologists, Muslim, Jewish, or Christian? And what they found out in the experiment is that people always had a bit of compassionate pain, but you only really felt compassionate pain when the people getting punctured was somebody from your in-group, meaning somebody, in this particular case, somebody with the same religion. If you saw somebody getting punctured from not from your religion, which we call then, in this case, the out group, then people barely experienced any compassionate pain. So this is quite depressing, I sometimes feel, from a subconscious thinking level, but it is something we have to embrace. People on a subconscious level, at least, have a hard time feeling a lot of empathy from people who are not from their group. So that also means something for how we trigger people, because we often don't just have a message to bring across, we have a messenger who brings that message across. And the messenger is the person who is also the trigger at that moment, the channel. And when somebody is perceived as an out group to you, somebody not like you because they are different, because they don't share the same values, then often we don't even pay attention to them. We don't listen to the message even. So that trigger is not successful. And that is why Greta Thunberg is an amazing messenger for some. If you perceive Greta to some degree as your in-group, because she shares the same values, because she is maybe European or whatever, and you feel strongly identically connected to that, then she might be a good in-group messenger for you. But for some, she's a bad messenger because they feel no connection to her, and then she is an out-group messenger. And then the message doesn't come across. We often see this in organizations as well, that just some people won't be convinced or won't even pay attention because they feel no connection to the messenger bringing that message. So how can we then actually stimulate behavior? Well, we have to think about in-group messengers. How can we actually have working triggers by bringing the message across with somebody from an in-group? There's interesting research that shows that actually parents are most influenced on climate by children. That is because of the fact that when children start talking about climate at home, then they are quite neutral, at least on a political level, because often, I wouldn't say always, but often children don't have a strong political ideology yet. And because parents really care what their children think, because they're theirs. So in that sense, they are the perfect in-group messenger often to bring the message across and to actually open up the conversation. I don't know if anybody has seen the documentary Game Changers, but Game Changers is I think, spectacular, at least from a documentary making level, a documentary on plant-based food. And it's actually targeted at athletes, because a lot of athletes are hard people to convince that they should eat plant-based meat products, because they are convinced by a lot of people and messengers that you should have animal protein, and that only animal protein allows you to really become performant and strong. Game Changers throws a completely different narrative through the words of top athletes in the world. Djokovic on a tennis level, plant-based, he's vegan. Hamilton, Formula One, plant-based, he's vegan. And there are numerous more top athletes who show that actually plant-based food at least gets you on par and might even help you outperform other athletes. This is important. We need these in-group messengers to bring the message across to different kinds of groups. Otherwise, people won't even be paying attention to our message. So in order to bring our messages across, we also need to think about the fact that we need multiple stories from multiple messengers. And for your organizations, for engaging people within your organizations, you should often also then think not just what is a good message, but who is the good messenger. To reach the people who we are trying to reach, who is a good in-group messenger? Are you the one, or are you more of an out-group? Try to just embrace that then and look for good in-group messengers who can actually bring that message across. And if you don't have that opportunity, try to become part of the in-group by stressing like-minded interests or values that you do have. With that, I have elaborated that we are all irrational beings, which is not a bad thing, but it is a good thing to just accept that we have to not just convince our rational thinking, but also our subconscious thinking, that in order for behavior to actually happen and to create actual impact, there needs to be motivation, but also enough ability, and people need to be prompted or triggered. And I have now shared 3 barriers from behavioral sciences which actually prevent people from taking sustainable actions, that is perceived as big leaps, that there are negative social norms limiting your motivation, and out-group messengers because of which people might not even be paying attention. And that in order to boost sustainable behavior, we need to turn things into small steps. We need to put the spotlight on positive social norms, and we need to use in-group messengers to make sure that people start paying attention to the messages we actually have. There are countless more insights and strategies to be found in behavioral sciences, which I don't have the time to delve into today. But one of them is surely also sharing stories of hope, because there is a lot of concern already and we need stories of hope. And that is why another initiative I've launched together with Lien Ruik is Regenerative Futures, a bi-weekly newsletter where we share hopeful narratives and future images to inspire people about how we can go forward differently and also guide us to that hopefully sustainable and even regenerative future. That was my talk for today, and I hope that you have gotten some indication as to how to actually engage people around sustainability, but realize that engagement is only impactful when you're actually able to change choices and behavior. Thank you so much. I will now have a couple of minutes still for Q&A, and I will quickly check in the chat what is being said there. I anyway see a question from Luz. Maybe the answer will be addressed later on, but I would like to know what is part of motivation, because we can have high motivation and high barriers. Is the motivation then still high, or would it count as medium or low motivation? Very good question. So I hope that maybe the answer already became clear, but if not, barriers can be on a motivational level, or they can be on an ability level. So some barriers, like for example, the negative social norm, is typically a motivational issue. We are subconsciously less motivated because we think that it's acceptable to do unsustainable behavior. But some barriers typically happen on that ability axis, that it's not the default behavior, that it is a very big step to do it. And then those barriers would not be considered a motivational barrier, but more of an ability barrier. So it can really be on one of those different levels. So I hope that answered your question. I don't know if people are able to ask. Okay, Nela asked another question in the chat. Can you give examples of how the boosters can be applied in large organizations? Well, yeah, I guess so. I will, on my slide, go back maybe to the overview of the different boosters. So the boosters I've used here, the small steps, I think it is very important to really think about, okay, what are the actual behaviors that we want people to do? Like I said in the beginning, say you want to work on a positive culture in your organization, then don't try to convince people just of the concept of, for example, transparency. Really try to think about what are the actual steps they have to do, what are the rituals, the behaviors we want people to show. And then you could say it's giving feedback to each other, open and honest feedback. Great, but then start thinking about how can we break that up in small steps? What are the smallest possible actions that people can start taking? And how can we start campaigning on that? Or how can we start asking people to do those things? So don't be satisfied yet when you just have defined behavior. Really try to break it down into small steps and try to take people along the way there. On positive social norms, I think it's really, of course, interesting to see to which degree the social norms are already taking place into your organizations, and then putting a spotlight on that. And I think the advantage of having a large organization is that there are more chances to find those stories and find those examples. And on a level of in-group messengers, also there, I think in large organizations do realize that you have a lot of subcultures. It's not because you are part of the same organization that you necessarily are all part of the in-group. Think about the fact that some people might only be convinced about smaller subcultures or people from the same small subculture in your organization. So have the modesty there to look at who might be the best organization, even in other places of the organization, and put them forward as in-group messengers to start bringing the message across. I hope that was an answer to your question. I see that we have also now reached the end of the webinar time. I will show at least my email address still in screen. If you would like to reach out, if you have any more questions, then you can reach out, I guess, either to the Ambassify team or to me, and I'll be happy to get back in touch with you. Thank you for tuning in today, and see you in the future, and good luck with engaging people around sustainability.